Some mysteries begin with a strange light in the sky. Others begin with a knock at the door. If you've just reported seeing a UFO and the next visitor on your porch is a man in an impeccably tailored black suit who somehow knows everything you've seen, it's probably not going to end well. Coincidence? Government agents? Something else entirely? For more than 70 years, people around the world have reported encounters with the mysterious strangers known as the Men in Black. Tonight, we'll follow the evidence, wherever it leads. To understand the Men in Black, we have to travel back to a very different America. The Second World War had ended only 2 years earlier. Radar was still a relatively new technology. Jet aircraft were beginning to reshape aviation, and tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union were quietly giving birth to what would become the Cold War. Against that backdrop, something extraordinary happened. On June 24, 1947, private pilot Kenneth Arnold reported seeing 9 crescent-shaped objects flying near Mount Rainier in Washington state. He described their movement as resembling saucers skipping across water. Newspapers quickly shortened that description to 2 words that would become part of history: flying saucers. Almost overnight, similar reports began appearing across North America. Most were probably ordinary aircraft. Some were likely astronomical phenomena. Others remain unexplained to this day. Whatever people were seeing, they were talking about it. And that's where our mystery truly begins. Because not everyone who reported a UFO claimed the story ended with the sighting. Some said someone came looking for them afterward. Only 3 days after Kenneth Arnold's famous sighting, another story emerged from Washington state, one that remains controversial to this day. A harbor patrolman named Harold Dahl claimed that he had been patrolling near Maury Island with his young son when 6 enormous donut-shaped objects appeared overhead. According to Dahl, one of the objects began wobbling before ejecting a shower of metallic debris. The falling fragments reportedly damaged his boat, injured his son, and killed the family dog. Even at the time, investigators questioned the account. Some believed Dahl had fabricated the entire story. Whether he had or not is almost beside the point. Because it wasn't the sighting that would become legendary. It was what Dahl claimed happened the next morning. While eating breakfast at a local cafe, a sharply dressed stranger approached his table. Without introducing himself, the man calmly sat down. Then he began describing the previous day's events, not in general terms, in precise detail. According to Dahl, the stranger knew things no one else should have known. When he finished, he offered only one piece of advice: do not discuss what happened. Then he stood, walked out the door, and disappeared. Whether the encounter happened exactly as Dahl described has never been proven. Yet, historians of the UFO phenomenon often point to this story as the first recognizable appearance of what would later become known as the Men in Black. At the time, no one realized the legend had just begun. But within a few short years, another witness would report an encounter so strange that it would transform a handful of scattered stories into one of the greatest mysteries in paranormal history. And his name was Albert Bender. By the early 1950s, reports of flying saucers had become a worldwide fascination. Newspapers covered strange lights in the sky almost weekly, and amateur investigators began organizing to compare notes and collect eyewitness testimony. One of the most dedicated among them was a young man from Bridgeport, Connecticut named Albert K. Bender. Unlike many of today's internet personalities, Bender wasn't chasing fame or fortune. He was simply fascinated by a mystery that no one seemed able to explain. From a modest upstairs room in his home, Bender founded the International Flying Saucer Bureau, one of the first civilian organizations devoted entirely to UFO research. Its membership quickly grew into the hundreds, with correspondents exchanging letters from across the United States and around the world. In an era long before email or social media, every report arrived in an envelope, every photograph was carefully examined, and every eyewitness account was typed by hand. To many enthusiasts, Bender was becoming one of the most respected voices in the growing UFO community. Then, without warning, everything stopped. Newsletters ceased publication. Meetings were canceled. The International Flying Saucer Bureau suddenly announced it was shutting down. Members were stunned. Rumors spread quickly. Had the government pressured Bender? Had he uncovered classified information? Was there another explanation entirely? When friends asked why he had abandoned the subject he loved, Bender's answer was unlike anything they expected. He claimed he had been visited, not by military officers, not by local police, but by three men dressed entirely in black. Years later, Bender finally described the experience in greater detail. According to his account, the visitors appeared without warning. Each wore a perfectly tailored black suit, black hats, dark overcoats. Their faces showed almost no emotion. Bender wrote that the room suddenly filled with the unmistakable smell of sulfur. An overwhelming feeling of weakness came over him, making it difficult to think clearly or even stand. He believed the visitors communicated with him mentally rather than through ordinary conversation. Whether this reflected an actual event, a vivid subjective experience, or something else entirely, remains impossible to determine. What is certain is that Bender believed the encounter was real. He later claimed the visitors warned him that his investigation into flying saucers had gone far enough. He was to stop asking questions, stop collecting reports, and leave the mystery alone. Almost immediately afterward, he did exactly that. For believers, this became the first fully developed Men in Black encounter. For skeptics, it was something else. A story shaped by stress, imagination, or perhaps a desire to explain why an organization had unexpectedly collapsed. But regardless of which explanation one prefers, Albert Bender's account changed UFO history forever. Because after his story became public, other witnesses began stepping forward, and many of them described the same impossible visitors. Albert Bender's experience might have remained little more than an unusual footnote in UFO history had it not been for author Gray Barker. In 1956, Barker published They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers, introducing Bender's story to a much larger audience. The book was enormously influential. It also remains controversial. Barker had a reputation as an entertaining storyteller, and some researchers have questioned how literally every account in his book should be taken. Critics argue that he occasionally blurred the line between documentation and dramatic storytelling. Yet something unexpected happened. As the years passed, people who claimed they had never met Bender, and in some cases had never even heard of his story, began describing encounters with remarkably similar visitors. Not identical, but strangely consistent. The details repeated themselves with unsettling regularity. The black suits, the emotionless expressions, the unusual speech. The sense that these visitors were trying very hard to appear ordinary, while somehow missing the mark. Witnesses frequently said it wasn't anything dramatic that frightened them. It was the small things, the way they rarely blinked, the way they smiled just a little too long, the way conversations felt rehearsed, as though every sentence had been memorized beforehand. Several witnesses later recalled that the visitors seemed oddly fascinated by everyday objects. One reportedly examined a ballpoint pen as if encountering one for the very first time. Another appeared uncertain about how to eat a simple meal. Individually, these details might seem trivial. Together, they created an unsettling impression. Many witnesses reached the same conclusion independently. They didn't feel as though they had been speaking to ordinary government agents. They felt as though they had been speaking to someone trying to imitate a human being, and almost succeeding. If that sounds unsettling, the next case would be even stranger. Because unlike Albert Bender, the next witness wasn't a UFO researcher at all. He was a respected physician, and his encounter remains one of the most detailed Men in Black reports ever recorded. If Albert Bender gave the Men in Black their identity, Dr. Herbert Hopkins gave them one of their most disturbing faces. Unlike Bender, Hopkins wasn't a professional UFO researcher. He was a respected physician living in rural Maine who had agreed to help investigate an alleged UFO abduction case. His role was limited. He interviewed witnesses, reviewed evidence, and attempted to approach the claims objectively. One evening in 1976, while organizing notes in his study, the telephone rang. The caller identified himself as a representative of a New Jersey UFO organization and asked if he could stop by to discuss the investigation. Hopkins agreed. He expected the visitor to arrive in an hour or two. Instead, only moments later, there was a knock at the front door. Hopkins would later say that this was impossible. His home sat well off the main road, and there simply wasn't enough time for someone to drive there after making the call. Yet, when he opened the door, a man was already standing on the porch. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. The man wore an immaculate black suit. His shoes looked freshly polished. His clothing appeared almost too perfect. Then Hopkins noticed the details. His skin was unnaturally smooth. He had almost no eyebrows, almost no eyelashes. His lips appeared strangely colorless. His speech was calm, measured, almost mechanical. Hopkins later recalled that the visitor's smile never seemed genuine. It remained fixed in place as though he understood the idea of smiling without fully understanding why people did it. The conversation quickly turned to the UFO investigation. According to Hopkins, the visitor instructed him to destroy all of his notes. He reportedly warned the doctor that continuing his investigation would not be in his best interest. Then, before leaving, the visitor asked Hopkins to produce a coin from his pocket. Hopkins handed him a penny. Holding it between his fingers, the visitor stared at it for a moment. According to Hopkins, the coin gradually lost its color, then seemed to dissolve into nothing. The visitor calmly remarked that the object no longer existed. Without another word, he stood, walked out the door, and disappeared into the darkness. Hopkins later admitted he was so shaken by the encounter that he burned much of the material related to the case. Whether the visitor was exactly as Hopkins remembered, or whether memory and emotion influenced the story over time, remains a matter of debate. But once again, the pattern repeated itself. Someone investigating UFOs, an unexpected visitor, a warning, and afterward, silence. Only a few years before Dr. Hopkins reported his encounter, another story had captured the attention of investigators across America. It began on a lonely stretch of highway outside Parkersburg, West Virginia. On the evening of November 2, 1966, traveling salesman Woodrow Derenberger was driving home through the hills when he noticed a bright object approaching from behind. At first, he assumed it was another automobile. But as the light drew closer, he realized it wasn't traveling on the road at all. It was hovering. According to Derenberger, the object moved effortlessly beside his truck before descending onto the highway directly in front of him. He brought his vehicle to a stop. Then, a door opened. A man stepped out. What happened next remains one of the most unusual encounters ever reported. Derenberger later described the stranger as smiling pleasantly. He appeared almost human. Yet there was something difficult to explain. His movement seemed unusually graceful. His expression never quite changed. And according to Derenberger, the man never spoke aloud. Instead, the words simply appeared inside his mind. The stranger introduced himself with a name that would become famous in paranormal history: Indrid Cold. Cold reportedly assured Derenberger that he meant him no harm and simply wished to communicate. The conversation lasted only a few minutes before the visitor calmly returned to his craft and disappeared into the night. Most people dismissed the story. Some assumed Derenberger had fabricated the encounter. Others believed he had experienced an exceptionally vivid hallucination. But there was one investigator who refused to dismiss it so easily. His name was John Keel. Keel spent countless hours interviewing Derenberger, comparing his testimony with dozens of other reports emerging from West Virginia during what would later become known as the Mothman Flap. The deeper Keel investigated, the less convinced he became that these were isolated events. Instead, he began noticing strange patterns: UFO sightings, unusual creatures, prophetic dreams, telephone calls, and increasingly, reports of mysterious visitors dressed entirely in black. To Keel, these weren't separate mysteries. They might all be connected. And that possibly would lead him to propose one of the most controversial theories in paranormal history. As the decades passed, similar reports continued appearing from around the world. Not hundreds every year, just enough to keep the mystery alive. One witness described 3 men arriving at his home without warning, asking detailed questions about a UFO he had reported only hours earlier. Several claimed the visitors drove gleaming black automobiles that seemed decades out of date. Others insisted the cars carried no license plate at all. Many noticed something else. The conversations never felt natural. Witnesses often struggled to explain exactly why, but the visitors answered questions politely, they spoke clearly, yet somehow everything felt rehearsed, as though they had memorized human conversation from a textbook. Some witnesses even said the men laughed at inappropriate moments, paused just before answering the simplest questions, or stared just a little too long before speaking. Individually, these details prove very little. Human memory is imperfect. Stories change over time. People influence one another, often without realizing it. Yet what continues to fascinate investigators isn't any single report. It's the remarkable consistency between reports separated by decades. People from different countries, different occupations, different backgrounds, many describing remarkably similar encounters. Coincidence? Perhaps. Folklore? Possibly. Or evidence of something genuinely unexplained? That question remains unanswered. Then there was author and investigator John Keel. Keel spent years interviewing witnesses, not only to UFO sightings, but to reports of strange lights, mysterious creatures, and unexplained encounters across the United States. The deeper he investigated, the more convinced he became that these events might not be separate mysteries at all. Instead, Keel proposed something far more unsettling. What if the men in black weren't government agents? What if they weren't extraterrestrials either? Keel suggested they might represent what he called ultra-terrestrials, an unknown intelligence capable of interacting with humanity in different ways throughout history. According to his theory, the phenomenon adapts to our expectations. Centuries ago, people described angels, demons, fairies, and mysterious travelers. Today, we describe UFOs, alien visitors, and men dressed in black suits. Whether Keel was correct is impossible to say. His theory remains controversial even among UFO researchers. Yet it raises an intriguing question. If countless witnesses are describing something real, are they accurately interpreting what they're seeing? Or are they simply giving a familiar face to something they don't yet understand? After more than 70 years, what can we say with confidence? We know that Albert Bender claimed he was visited. We know that Dr. Hopkins sincerely believed his encounter occurred. We know that dozens of similar reports have been published over the decades. We know that in one case, actor and UFO enthusiast Dan Aykroyd told us that because of the sensitive nature of a show he was doing about UFOs, he was visited by the men in black. Every generation inherits its own mysteries. Some are solved by new evidence, others quietly fade into history. The men in black have done neither. For more than 7 decades, the stories have continued. Some are almost certainly misunderstandings. Some may have been embellished over time. A few may never be explained. Whether they were government investigators, masterful pranksters, products of folklore, or representatives of something we have yet to understand, the mystery endures because no single explanation answers every question. And maybe that's why these stories continue to capture our imagination. Not because they prove the extraordinary, but because they remind us how much of our world remains unexplained. And maybe that's enough. Because somewhere tonight, someone will report seeing something impossible in the sky. They'll tell only a handful of people. They'll wonder whether anyone else saw it. And if history has taught us anything, they may also wonder who might come knocking at their door. If there's one lesson to be learned from tonight's story, it's this. If you ever see something impossible in the sky, maybe think twice before telling the entire neighborhood. Because while the percentages of a man showing up in a black suit at your front door are probably pretty slim, they're also probably not zero. Whether these visitors are government agents, urban legends, or something far stranger, their story remains one of the most enduring mysteries in paranormal history. So until next time, if someone knocks unexpectedly, you might want to look through the peephole first, and then forget everything you saw.